Welcome to the man who lost 200 pounds. And here's your host, Darko.
Hello ladies and gents, my name is Darko Botic and I would like to welcome you to the Man Who Lost 200 Pounds podcast. The following conversation with wonderful and amazing Hale is one of those which vividly remind me why it's important to discuss issues pertaining to mental health in the context of weight gain, weight loss, dieting culture in general, and body image. The dialogue between the two of us is highly important and relevant to my mission of helping you change and motivate you to address your struggles without being afraid to seek help. My discussion with Polly was recorded during the Mental Health Awareness Week, but due to reasons I mentioned in the previous filler episode, and I admit it was a filler episode, I failed to broadcast it on time. I believe that our discussion on mental health, body image issues, and severe eating disorders is significant enough regardless of the timeline, and I hope you'll enjoy a very candid and transparent dialogue between a former anorexic and morbidly obese individuals. But before we get into it, I would like to ask you for a moment of your time. I'm back to coaching, and I am looking for clients who have obesity. I took a very long hiatus from coaching. It wasn't a hard and thoroughly analyzed decision. It came to me naturally and suddenly. In essence, I took a break from trying to help others because I knew I couldn't fully commit to people before I was able to help myself first. Well, now I'm back, and I am looking for clients who are interested in working with me on improving their health, body image, disordered eating and habits while losing weight and keeping it off. Even though I have the ambition to help everyone, after I quite literally spent a whole year pondering and contemplating how to help you and offer the most value, I came to a painfully obvious solution. I'm going to work only with people who either A, have obesity, and B, had obesity, that means lost a lot of weight and currently struggling with the mindset, weight regains, and body image issues. As most of you who are familiar with my story know, I've been morbidly obese, and in a 4-year span I cut my body weight down from approximately 180 kilos, which is around 400 pounds, to below 95 kilos. I'm going to use 2 decades of living with adverse effects of obesity, everything that I learned from the SBS Academy, and 8 years of education on psychological aspects of obesity, such as developing mindsets, changing behaviors, and creating new habits, as well as formal training on nutrition and exercise science. I will also incorporate my vast experience with losing weight, overcoming a couple of rough weight regain periods, and use the infinitely long list of mistakes I have made to make sure I either guide you around the obstacles or lower the bar so we can jump over them together. The things I can promise and guarantee are my utter devotion and dedication to be there for you, to guide you and counsel you, and to give all I got to help you reach your goals. I want us to have a relationship, which I consider to be crucial, and I'm going to offer you an experience filled with care, love, and empathy, but also stern direction and guidance when you need it. I will hold you accountable at all times. There will be zero bullshit and nonsense. Our working relationship will be based on consistent communication and trust I'm aiming to gain from you from the get-go. Because of this, I can only work with a limited number of people, and exclusively with folks who are ready for a change, and with whom I can have a real connection. I will not bullshit you with a typical sales pitch and say that I have only 2 more spots available or anything nonsensical like that, but instead I want to give you full transparency as to why I'm charging for my service. Number 1. As I'm sure it's the case with you as well, I value my time. I believe I paid my dues tenfold, invested a lot of money and time to acquire a proper education or tools to help you. Number 2. In just a couple of weeks, I'm moving to London. The primary goal is to focus on writing my first book. I would like to have it on shelves next year, and to do that, I need to create time. I also need to pay the rent. Number 3. Countless times I've tried to work with people for free, and regardless of solid or fantastic initial results, people often merely lose interest due to lack of investment from their side, lack of proper buy-in. So I'm charging £100 monthly That's 100 British pounds per month. And you will get initial Skype call up to 60 to even 90 minutes, where we talk about your goals, setting realistic checkpoint marks to get us there, and creating an approach that caters to your needs and schedule. 2 times per month, we will have mindset Skype calls up to 30 minutes, where we focus on creating a foundational mindset and habits to set us on a successful path. 2 times per month, we're going to also have education Skype calls, up to 30 minutes as well, where I'm answering your questions in detail, making necessary readjustments, and teaching you some pretty cool stuff on nutrition, exercising, and behaviors. Or, we can just chat about Blade Runner, Star Wars, and pop culture in general. Daily check-ins via text or email. 1 time per month, we are going to have another long Skype call in between 60 and 90 minutes. And then we are going to develop a next 4-week stage. Eating guidelines and custom monthly workout activity plan based on your preference and schedule is a given. Since this is an investment for both you and me, and since the key for your success is the quality of our relationship, I'm offering a 30-minute initial assessment Skype call free of charge. My only goal here is to get to know you, answer your questions, and see if we are a good fit. Nothing will be pitched and no bullshit will be sold. In case we are potentially a bad fit, I will be frank and honest with you, and I might refer you to people with skills and experience which I know and trust, and with whom I believe you'll have a better relationship and more success. For me, that's really all that matters. If you're interested in a coaching relationship with me, and if you feel ready to make a change, please contact me. I will leave all of my contact information and social media handles in the show notes. And let's have a chat. Let's schedule a talk. And also, if you know someone who could benefit from working with me, I would be eternally grateful if you could share this with them or have them contact me. Thank you very much. Much love. So that's it. Thank you very much for your patience, and let's dig into the episode, and have a wonderful week. Cheers. So, Polly, hello. It's such a pleasure finally talking to you. I say finally because I had to reschedule our chat a couple of times. It's completely my fault, and I can only apologize, but here you are. And before we dig into the crux of our conversation, would you please introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Hey, Darko, likewise. It's really nice to finally chat. I heard your story on a couple of other podcasts recently, and it really resonated with me, which is why I got in touch with you, because I'm now a fitness professional like yourself. Name is Pollyanna Hale, which is the name I use on social media. My company is the Fit Mum Formula, but actually my background's very similar to yours, because I came into the fitness industry from a very poor health, because I was very, very ill with anorexia, and it was hearing your story that really resonated with me, and it's what drives me to be so passionate about health and fitness now, having had such poor health and realizing how terrible it is when you don't have a body that's functioning properly, and when you don't have the ability to look after yourself and have the self-love and self-care that you need. It's really, really destroys your life, and it's what drives me now, and what drives my passion for all things health and fitness.
I'm very much excited about our discussion today, partially because of its nature, and also because everything we're going to touch upon today is very appropriate to Mental Health Awareness Week. Generally speaking, one might think that our pasts have nothing in common, since our struggles with weight and body image are sort of like on the opposite sides of a spectrum. But the reality is that your struggles with anorexia and mine with morbid obesity, they gave birth to similar sort of demons. The reason I find this unbelievably intriguing is because a lot of the differences between your history with body image and food and mine, it essentially comes down to nature of coping mechanisms. Am I right to assume so? And I listened to your story as well, and essentially I can just echo what you just said. I find it intriguing because I found so much similarities between the two of us, regardless of how we coped.
Yeah, definitely. There's one thing that you mentioned there, which is coping mechanisms, and that's what I think what the eating disorders of all kinds have in common with other addictions, because at the end of the day, it is just a way of coping with your feelings. Some
Hmm.
people overeat, binge eat, other people are bulimic, other people restrict their calories, other people overexercise, and for some people it's drugs and alcohol. At the end of the day, what it all comes down to is an unhealthy behavior to try and suppress uncomfortable emotions, and by taking part in these other activities which aren't so healthy, they act as a coping strategy. They act as a distraction.
Mm.
They act as a way of giving your life a purpose and a meaning, and a something to do every day that takes you away from whatever that emotional pain is you're feeling. Whether you're aware of it at the time, your actions are essentially your drug of choice, that are making you feel better in the immediate moment, but ultimately are making things worse for you. And the other thing you mentioned there is how it seems ironic that, and it seems like we're opposite ends of the spectrums, but that's something that I've noticed with a lot of the women who come to me as well, who are overeating, and they may not have a serious eating disorder. They may not be binge eating or be classified as having an eating disorder per se,
Mm.
but what they are doing is using food to control their emotions. They eat when they're stressed, they eat when they're tired, when they're bored, when they're feeling down on themselves, they turn to sugar and junk food for the most part.
Yep.
And that's what it is. It's about using food to control your emotions, when really when it comes down to a primal need, food is just fuel at the end of the day, but it's become such a big emotional thing that people are actually using it as a drug. And so just prescribing people food in terms of macros, calories that they need to be healthy isn't good enough, because that doesn't address all of these emotional problems and the reasons that we use food as an emotional crutch in the first place.
Yeah, completely agree. And to get back to your point, where you put the connection between addiction and our relationship with food, or our history with translate to the relationship with food. For a very long time, especially since I started pursuing a career of a fitness professional, I intentionally avoided making this parallel between addiction and overeating in my case. But something happened to me when I started telling my story. I did a lot of, and I still do a lot of introspection. And every time I look back, I come to the same conclusion as you just mentioned, is that regardless of what, I have a history of using drugs and drinking alcohol to put me to sleep just because I wanted to numb my pain. I wanted to substitute it for something I did not have, or something that I longed for, which is essentially a normal lifestyle, When food becomes that tool to cope with pain, with struggles in life in general, I think it's very viable and justifiable to make those parallels between, addiction and relationship with food. So would you mind getting us on track with your story? As I mentioned, I do a lot of introspection, but when you look back, can you pinpoint one period of time or an event, like it was in my case, when your struggles with eating disorders started?
Well, it's interesting actually. I've been told by psychologists in the past that there's 3 things needed for an addiction or an eating disorder to occur. First of all, there's genetic component, and we're still learning about genetics, but it does appear that loads of mental health problems do have a genetic root. So you're born with that predisposition. Then there's your things that shape your personality, your upbringing as you're growing up. For me, I mean, my parents got divorced. I was bullied a little bit at school, but those things aren't particularly unusual, unfortunately, these days. I moved around a lot at schools. Sometimes I struggled making friends, but again, other people who go through these things don't necessarily develop an eating disorder. And then there's something that's happening in the moment at that time that you develop an eating disorder that acts as like a trigger that means you're under immense stress. And for me at the time, I was in my late teens. I was at stage school, so I was dancing every day and I was under pressure from a body image point of view at the time to make sure I stayed slim and looked good. And you're always under pressure to be the best at stage school. And I had problems. I had a boyfriend at the time who unfortunately ran into some troubles with the law, and that was incredibly stressful for me. And I think all of those things at the time were what triggered it for me. I first made myself sick. I first vomited when I was shockingly just 12 years old. It sounds so young, but looking back, that was so young. And I remember having body image issues and thinking that I looked fat. I wasn't at all, but I thought I looked fat from about the age of 8, 9, 10 years old. Now I've got an 8-year-old daughter now. Sorry, she's just turned 9. And so to look back on how young I was at the time and to think I was fat, that's quite saddening actually. So I don't know, in a nutshell, I don't know what it was that caused me personally to have an eating disorder, but I think it was a combination of many different things that were put on top of my personality, which is quite an addictive personality. I'm quite a perfectionist. I'm quite driven, and these are all characteristics you do see in people with eating disorders. So I think the stresses that I've experienced in my life, maybe if I'd been a more stable personality, I would have coped with them a bit better. But as it was, they just acted as catalysts for me, and the upshot was that I developed an eating disorder as a coping mechanism for all of that.
Yep. Yeah. It makes excuse me. It makes perfect sense to me because I've been through similar thing. I've been a victim of war and ethnic cleansing in Balkans in the early 90s. So I went literally from being overweight as a child in my early childhood to being extremely underweight as a consequence of hunger and not having food, not having clear water even, for a very extended period of almost 2 years. Like immediately, once we escaped to the free zone, I started rapidly gaining weight and becoming obese throughout my primary and high school and the short time I went to college. So I can 100% understand that, and I completely agree with you that the events that occurred in our childhood very much dictate our relationship with food later on. So for as long as I can remember, a lot of my family members and my mother and my grandmother especially, they were like feeders after we escaped the war zone, and I was the same as well, because essentially we just had this almost like a animal-like state of mind in which we just wanted to eat as much as we could, because we were always kind of anticipating that, that hunger and starvation might happen again. So, but when you mentioned like genetic predisposition to eating disorders, have you done any research on your end in regards to your family's history, and how and why do you think that reflected on you?
Well, there is mental health problems in my family. There's people in my family who've had depression and eating disorders in the past, but I think they're too common these days to actually say, yeah, it is definitely I've inherited it, without actually knowing what genes can cause it and without testing every single person. They're so common. I don't think we realize how common mental health problems are because people don't talk about them. They're still quite taboo, and I think that's getting better. People are talking about them more and more and being open, but still I'm astonished how many people who perhaps don't talk about their mental health struggles. Maybe they're struggling with depression or anxiety and they might be on medication for that, and you would never know it from the way they act in their daily life, the way they present themselves on social media, the way they talk to their friends and family. Yet because I'm open about my own mental health, as soon as people come into, say, my free Facebook support group, and people get in touch with me because because they see I'm a personal trainer, nutritionist, and they come to me because they want to lose weight. As soon as I start probing, it comes out that they're really struggling with anxiety and depression. So I think these mental health problems are actually a lot more prevalent than we realize. It's just that people we just don't see it. We don't know. Looking at somebody, you can't see it from the outside because it is in your head, and often there aren't external signs that give clues away. But interestingly, going back to genetics, I am a carrier of something called the MTHFR mutation gene, and basically it's a type of gene that there's variations of it, and if you've got a particular variation of this gene, it does mean that you are a lot more likely to have certain health problems, including being on the bipolar spectrum, and I am on the bipolar spectrum. So whether that one MTHFR gene has been the trigger ultimately has been, that's been the thing that's made my brain go a little bit wrong or not, I don't know. But yeah, I think there definitely is going to be, I think we'll know more in future about the genetics of it. And being genetic, bar actual genetically modifying human beings, which probably isn't such a good thing until we know a lot more about it. I don't know if there's much we can do about our genetics, but what we can do is try and raise awareness of these things, know how to spot the signs, and hopefully try and help people as much as possible, because the earlier interventions happen, the easier it is to recover from any mental illness. The longer it goes on, the more it becomes ingrained and the more it becomes a way of life. Certainly for me, it took me quite a few years to become well again. I won't say fully recover, I'll go into that in a minute, but it took me many, many years to get to a healthy weight and to become stable. And towards the end, when I was just before I managed to achieve stability, the problem was no longer the problem. It wasn't about the eating anymore. It wasn't about the food. It wasn't about the emotional issues anymore. All of that had been dealt with. I have seen so many psychologists. I've seen so many counselors. I have talked out my entire life story so many times. But by that point, it was a way of life for me. I didn't know how else to be. My illness was who I was. It was my personality. It was how I lived. It was how I saw myself. It was my identity.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't this emaciated, weak little being, then I didn't feel I was anybody. That's who I was, and I didn't see myself as anyone else. So if I let go of this illness, then who would I be? Because that was my identity, and it kept me safe, and it kept me feeling secure. And that's the crazy thing about these illnesses. When from the outside, it's really quite simple. It's, in my case, just eat the food, or in your case, just stop eating so much. But if it was that simple, then we would do it. And
Yeah.
I think that's what people, if you've not been there, you don't understand that logic doesn't come into play. It's not as logical as that. I wish it was, but it really isn't as easy as just knowing what to eat. I think most people know what to eat these days, even people who struggle with their weight without an eating disorder. You ask anybody what's a healthy meal or what's a healthy food, they can tell you. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. So if you push that to the extreme end, somebody who's really got a clinical eating disorder, they know what they've got to do. But getting out of that cycle is incredibly, incredibly difficult because it feels safe. And I don't know about you, but was there a part of you maybe who enjoyed the behaviors that you were indulging in the overeating? There must have been some reward that came from that, in the feeling of overeating or binge eating, that drove you to do it. It's similar to the reward pathways that maybe alcoholics feel.
Yeah, it's very interesting you asked that, because going and digging through my past, recent, and when I say recent, it happened weeks ago, that like for the third time in my life I tried to commit suicide. Just like thinking about it, it's when I overeat, when I binge eat, like those short, very brief instances are when I feel alive, when I feel joy. But profoundly thinking about it, it always comes down to me binge eating and overeating on really highly palatable, delicious food is a sort of a punishment. It always is. And this is why you are so right when you say that logic is just not the part of when mental issues or when mental health issues comes to play, because at the same time here I am feeling good enough to cope with everyday life while I'm eating, and at the same time punishing myself, and just like subsequently after that brief moment of joy I would feel such regret, embarrassment, that it just starts this poisonous never-ending circle. I just wrote a massive article about my issues with mental health and how it reflects very wrong perception of masculinity. So I think it's highly important that we talk about these issues. I think it's very important that we address these issues. For the very first time in my life, just a few weeks ago, I decided to seek professional help. This was something that I could never do back in Croatia because, you live in this very poisonous, toxic environment where talking about mental health is simply not allowed for men, because that's not manly, that's not what men do, but it's like very much allowed to women because women should be frail and weak, and this entire perception of you are just going to look like a feminine man or like a woman because you cannot handle what's happening in your brain, in your mind, and for me it took me very, very long time, and I made some horrible choices in my life just because I could never get over that barrier of seeking help.
Would you know the leading cause of death of young men is suicide? I think for that reason, is because men don't feel they can open up.
Yeah.
Having said that, although anorexia is very much seen primarily as a female illness for adolescent women, that is the case, and from that point of view, I fell into that category. It's only now, and only with select people, that I can be extremely honest about what's going through my head. And I can do that, for example, my husband's very good at, because he will challenge me on my irrational thoughts, so I can be open with him. But even from the outside, most people would look at me as an anorexic or past anorexic and see it as a miserable existence where you're constantly hungry, where you think you're fat all the time. You look in the mirror and you see yourself as huge, and so you're always trying to lose that excess fat that you're imagining. Actually, the things that go through my head are a lot weirder than that. They're a lot more sinister in some ways, and it's like I'm possessed by some kind of devil being. I mean, for example, when I looked in the mirror, I never, and I know some people do, but I never saw myself as fat. I could see myself for what I was.
Yep.
And for every bone that stuck out, that was a victory for me. For every few pounds or even half a pound lost on the scales, that gives me, to this day, that gives me a rush of adrenaline, and I don't really get on the scales for that reason, because I know that adrenaline rush for me is dangerous. If I feel hungry, to me that's a good thing. If I feel like I've got loads of energy and my belly's full, I get voices in my head telling me that I'm greedy and fat. I've eaten too much. So for me, being tired and hungry is a good thing. That makes me feel in control. It makes me feel feel powerful. It feels like a drug. And that sounds, even saying it, that sounds warped and sick. But yeah, that's what it is. It's a sickness. It's an illness. And you do think what other people think are just crazy thoughts, like you're possessed like a demon, but that's the reality of it. I get thoughts in my head that I want to be so skeletal, that I'm wasting away, that I'm on death's door, and to me that's a thrilling idea. And it even sounds ridiculous saying it, but that's what it is. That's an eating disorder. And that's the side that people don't understand, because it's so illogical. Why would you want to starve yourself to death? Why would you want your organs to fail? How is feeling hungry a good thing? None of that is logical in any way, but yet that's how I feel.
Yep.
And I had to challenge myself on that every day. And that's what I was saying about not claiming to be fully recovered, because although I do hear stories of people completely recovering and they can live their life and eat in a way completely normally, in a way like they've never had an eating disorder. I know many people, including myself, who it's more like a chronic condition that you manage. So yes, I'm a healthy weight today because I battle to be a healthy weight and to eat well every single day. But that means every single mealtime, I will get voices in my head telling me I'm eating too much and I need to take that bit off and leave that bit off my plate.
Yep.
Every single mealtime, every single day, 365 days a year, and this has been over 10 years now that I've been stable. And that's what I have to deal with as an eating disorder sufferer every single day, just to stay a healthy weight. And you would never know, because I can pretty much manage it very well. I can eat in social situations, I can go out to restaurants, but that's because you can't see the voices going through my head. You can't see when I'm looking at a restaurant menu, scrutinizing it. I'm not thinking, what do I fancy tonight, like most people would be thinking. I'm thinking, what can I eat here? What feels safe? Where am I going to not feel out of my comfort zone? What's not going to freak me out? And internally, I'm shaking every time at a restaurant, but nobody else would know that.
Yes.
Because that bit's going through my head. But if I don't challenge those things, and I just went with it, I'd be right back to, I'd be right back to 5 stone on death's door. So I had to challenge it every day, and that's the price I pay for having an eating disorder and staying well. But it is worth it, because life is good now. But it is an ongoing chronic thing. I think for a lot of people, it's something you have to manage every day, and there'll be peaks and troughs, and there'll be good days and bad days. But nobody outside, unless you understand what it's like to go through it, nobody on the outside will be able to see that.
Absolutely. This entire idea of or the outside perception of me once I lost a lot of weight is that now I'm fully recovered. That's it. But I just don't believe, like you just mentioned, I don't believe in the idea that I will ever be fully recovered. And that's not me being pessimistic. It's just, I think this is where I'm very realistic with my outlook on my issues, because for the very first time I seeked professional help, because these demons that you talk about are always there. They surface in unexpected times, regardless of how my life at the moment is. I've been through a lot of difficulties in my life, and I wasn't depressed. Right now, my life is perfect. I share my life with amazing woman. We both pursue worthy goals. We are both, ticking off the things from our bucket lists. It's just amazing life, especially from the outside. But what's happening inside of me is not reflection of what my life currently is. So I completely agree with that. And there's also this similarity between the two of us in a more like tangible sense. What I mean by that is that once I started losing a lot of weight, my demons were still there. It's just they appeared in a different form. So now my demons were not pushing me towards overeating. In a 5-month span, Polly, since I started losing weight, I went from being morbidly obese, essentially dying, to introducing bulimia to my life in like 5 months. And after that, it was just like 4 years or 5 years of simply like being inside of this poisonous cloud of orthorexia, where I could not relax at all. I could not enjoy life. So I was still very much mentally in the same place. It's just perception of others completely changed. Everybody thought that, I was perfectly fine. And to that account, like, once I decided to tell my story to the world, the first person I contacted was my mother, because my mother did not know what was happening to me. She had zero idea. And for a moment she thought that I was making things up, because to her I always seemed happy and jolly, when I was fat. And she would often reflect on my past in morbid obesity as the period of my life where I was the happiest. Because that was my performance, essentially. Show other people that I'm fine, because I had to mask what was happening inside of me, because otherwise I would be perceived either as crazy or I would be perceived as effeminate. And people don't understand that in many, many instances I was either high or half drunk without people even realizing it. I mean, there was a period when in one day, Polly, this is what fascinates me. Like, in one day, in just a span of a couple of hours, I went from climbing on a chair trying to hang myself to a couple of hours later having a perfectly normal discussion with my mother, with my friends, and nobody realized what happened a couple of hours before, because I took a half of ecstasy that day, just so I could be fun and lovable and so people wouldn't suspect that something was, happening to me. And this is why I think our stories are powerful. It's not that I'm trying to pat myself on the back, but talking about these issues is what helped me change, is what helped me, I won't say recover, but help me manage my demons and keep them at bay much easier.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the characteristics of a lot of mental health problems is secrecy, being secret about them, isn't it? And it's keeping them under wraps. I think sometimes that's partly out of fear. It's a gut reaction, and I do it today. If somebody in my family, if my mum or my husband says to me, you look like you're losing a bit of weight, are you eating properly? The warning signals might start shining up for them, and my automatic reaction is, I'm fine, it's fine, there's nothing wrong, because the illness part of me doesn't want to be stopped. I don't want help.
Yes.
Or rather, the ill part of me doesn't want help, because if I receive help for my undereating, that help will require me to eat more, and the sick part of me doesn't want to eat more. The sick part of me wants to be skinny and emaciated and to not eat enough. So by accepting I need help, I'm going to have that coping mechanism taken away from me, and I don't want my coping mechanism taken away from me. So for that reason, I think we do tend to hide things, and so that we can hold on to this. At the end of the day, our coping mechanism is making us feel good temporarily, and we don't want to be stopped.
Yep.
And it makes it incredibly difficult to seek help because of that fear of what we might lose by getting help.
Yeah. Just a couple of weeks ago, I went back to Croatia to visit my friends and family. At this point, I gained, in this period of depression, I gained almost 30 kilos, which is a lot, and it's very much visible. And not up until a couple of days ago, I realized that I wasn't really fearful of how people will perceive me, or people would think that, I'm starting to become fat again because of any superstitious reason. I realized that I was very much afraid to let people know that something is not right with me. That rapid weight regain is just going to be a very loud signal for everyone that I'm not well. Therefore, I can only agree with what you're saying. But speaking of asking for professional help, you just mentioned that you discuss these issues with professionals. So was there a time for you when that moment clicked for you, when you decided to seek professional help, that was not, you didn't perceive it as maybe as a last resort as I did, but how did that went for you? When did you decide to seek professional help?
I think the reason that it took me so long to get to stability is because I didn't seek help myself. I was pushed into getting help. Family members noticed there was an issue. I was taken along to an eating disorders clinic and put into a treatment protocol, but I wasn't ready to get well. I wasn't ready to accept. I could see that I had a problem, but I wasn't ready to let go of that problem. And I semi-participated in the program I was given. But to cut a long story short, no, I was hospitalized. I ended up having 3 hospitalizations of at least 3 months at a time in mental health hospitals. The third one, I was sectioned because I refused to cooperate. I was pretty psychotic at the time, and I wanted to leave. I wanted to go, and for various reasons, they decided that I was unsafe to leave. They put a section on me to keep me there, and I reluctantly was forced into treatment all along the way. But there was this moment when it was shortly after my 3rd hospital admission. I was vaguely a healthy weight, but I was once again starting to relapse again. I had a little bit of time off from college because after being in hospital, I was going to restart that year in September. So I remember being in a pub with a couple of friends, and one of them announced she was having a baby, and the other one announced that she was getting married. And in that moment, all of a sudden, it kind of dawned on me that everyone was moving on with their life. They were having careers, they were getting families, they were getting relationships, and I was being left behind. And for the first time in quite a few years, I felt lonely, and I felt like this anorexia wasn't being my friend anymore, and actually I was being left behind, and I was lonely because of it. And I wanted all of these things. All my life I've wanted children. All my life I wanted a little girl of my own. I grew up in a big family, and that if I could ever have just one dream, that's what I wanted. I wanted children, and I knew it wasn't going to happen. Even physiologically, I wasn't going to be able to have babies if I was physically unwell. And something changed in me, and from that moment, for the first time ever, I really hand on heart decided actually I don't want this in my life anymore. Previously, I'd been in hospital, I'd been forced into all sorts, eating those prescribed meals and going to all the counseling sessions and, just following the system. But I didn't really want to do it. I was just doing it because I sort of had to. And ultimately, every time I relapsed, because I didn't really want to do it, I wasn't ready to get over it. I wasn't ready to let go. But that time, and I can picture it today, it was a sunny day in the pub garden and thinking, actually, I want to move on with my life. I want children. I want to get married. And that summer, I met a guy in the pub who, and we started seeing each other. And he said to me that I was honest to him about these problems because I was a little bit underweight, and he could see it. He said, well, look, why are you so skinny? I wasn't desperately underweight, but it was obvious that I was a little bit thin. And he said, look, I like you, but I don't have any time for that kind of stuff. I don't understand it, and it's got no place in my life. And it pushed me that little bit further into thinking, right, if I want to move on with my life, I really have to get rid of this now, and I really have to fight it. And I wanted to, and that was the first time I actually wanted to do it. And I've seen so many dietitians in the past, so many professionals, and just fought the whole way through. This time I took myself off to see a dietitian who helped me through it, and I gained weight by myself for the first time ever, not in hospital. Previously, I'd only ever gained weight as an inpatient with supervised meals. This time I gained weight by myself because I wanted to do it. That man's now my husband, and we now have 2 gorgeous little girls, and I achieved it. And I think that's what keeps me going now, my girls. Every time I think, no, I just want to starve myself. I want to get back right to it and just throw in the towel. Yeah, I have bad days. I have self-conscious days. I have difficult days. But what stops me going right back there is these 2 little people. I think, right, I've got to hold on to this. And however hard it is, it might be a battle every single day for the rest of my life that I've got to fight in my head. But if that's what it takes to stay here, to stay well, to be able to enjoy life and live life and be a mum to these two little girls, then that's a fight I'm prepared to fight. And it is a fight. It's a daily fight. But it is one I'm winning now.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And, you just said something that I'm currently realizing is that how important is this readiness to change, to feel ready to do something, because I spent maybe last 8 years since I started losing weight. Majority of those 8 years were in a caloric deficit, me trying to lose weight. And after this massive weight regain, like in the last month or so, I lost 10 kilograms without putting any real effort into it, really. And the reason is because I am completely ready to change. And this readiness didn't happen all of a sudden. I wasn't just, waiting to one day to wake up and say to myself, okay, I'm ready now. It's when I address these deeper issues, these core troubles, that I started feeling ready. I think that's amazing that, this similarity between how we perceive things is just something that fascinates me. But speaking of perception, like you mentioned a couple of times, and you talked about other people's perception of you while you were ill. How did you feel about that, and how did this, how did this change? Especially, how do people perceive you now?
At the time, I think, and I'm possibly putting words into people's mouths here, but I think there was a mix of pity, concern. I think it took a lot of expectations off me because I was this weak, small being who was quite physically as well as mentally sick. I think that lowered people's expectations of what I would do and what I could achieve. And I think in some way that took the pressure off me because no one ever expected me to amount to much, not while I was in that state. I wasn't given responsibility in life. And I think in some ways that made life easier. It meant that I could live in this childlike bubble without having to face up to life. At the time, I found that a lot of people I was close to, my close friends, felt distance. And I don't know if I think that's in part to do with being in a starved state and in a state of mental sickness. You do detach a little bit from your emotions. You become distant. You're not your real personality. You're not who you are. And so I was a different person. It wasn't that they changed. It's that I was a very different person, and I was no longer the friend that they once knew. So I didn't feel that closeness to many friends while I was ill. But I always knew they were there in the background. And as soon as I was ready to change and I was ready to get well, and now to this day, those friends are still there. Mm-hmm. And they always were. But while I was ill, I was just this other being. I wasn't the real me. I was like this alien being who had taken over my body and who was speaking differently and behaving differently and living life differently. And I don't think anybody really knew how to deal with that because I wasn't being myself.
Yeah.
So I don't. Yeah. My friends. I'm very lucky that I've got such good friends that they were still there for me when I came back. And friends that I've had for years are still there, and the close friends will never leave you. The people who matter never leave you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do think it kept me in this childlike state that was maybe on a subconscious level deliberate, because it is my way of not facing up to life.
I got to the very same conclusion. While I was morbidly obese, while I was living like a hermit, essentially not leaving out there was a period, Polly, when I did not leave my house for almost 2 years. After my grandparents got killed in front of my house when I was in my early 20s, that was when the worst of things started happening to me. And I wasn't fortunate as you are to have friends, to have family, and to have like any kind of support system. So I had to, in time, I was so very determined to change that I wanted to do everything on my own. I felt that this will give me a full control of my life. But on the other hand, I really longed for any kind of support. So I literally looked, for feedback from bystanders even. I would go to buy myself jeans for the very first time, and I could not fit them, but I would talk to a person who works there and tell them that I will return back in 2 months and I will fit in them, and people would look at me like I'm a lunatic, like who are you? But I would like proactively seek that feedback. So I had to create that support system for my own, which resulted in me completely changing my social circles. A lot of my relationships that I considered friendly at the time, I recognized as being very toxic, very negative for me. So I just got rid of a lot of people from my life. But this made me introduce, as you said, true friends. People who deeply care for you and people who are not at all concerned or fazed by your physical appearance.
So that's really interesting, because I do think, whereas, I'm lucky in that I've got some great people in my life, and some of them have kind of gone, and the ones who really matter have stayed. I've always, at some point, I've had people who, in the darkest of times, I could have turned to if I chose to. I didn't always choose to, but I could have if I chose to. So I think a lot of people do feel very isolated. So where did you find these connections? Where did you find all these people who really truly understood you? Did social media play a part in that, or was it in real life, socializing in different places, or how did you go about doing that? Because that's something that I think would really help other people who are struggling and feeling alone, and like people don't understand them. Where can they find people who do understand them?
Well, I think it's much easier today because of social media, and I think this is one of the amazing benefits of social media. We hear a lot how social media negatively affects, especially children, and how social media creates this poisonous reflection on our bodies and all of that. But on the other hand, social media is amazing. It offers you a chance to connect with people throughout the world who are in a very same position as you are, or who overcame troubles that you are currently facing, which is just fantastic. I did not have that at the time. When I started losing weight, this was start of 2010. Even though I was very active on certain forums online and stuff like that, it was mainly based on my profession, which was being a video game journalist. So it's funny, Polly, when you ask me that, because I was very much active in avoiding any kind of social interaction, because I was so much into it that at one point I realized that all of my friends, or people who I consider friends, were essentially just people online, and I wanted to detach myself from that. And also I spent a lifetime longing for normal interactions with people. I've spent my entire primary and high school not hanging out with people, not going to clubs, not partying. I was essentially doing that on my own, in my own room, drinking, taking drugs, and all of that. I've been through all of these experiences that my friends went to. It's just I've been through all of those experiences on my own. And for me, I just, when I started creating these new social circles, I wasn't necessarily going out and trying to make friends, being desperate about it. It's just I longed for any kind of company and social interactions that part just happened on its own. And from there I made some real true friendships that last to this day, and that will probably last forever.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a mix as well. I think it's really important for me to have people who are completely quote unquote normal, who have very stable lives, happy lives, they do normal things, and it brings me back down to reality and how a good, healthy, normal life can be when I feel like I'm struggling. And it's great to have people like that around me for, I guess, fun and just happiness and that side of life. But at the same time, I found it really important to have people in my life who are harder to find, actually, harder to come across, who understand the other part of me, who I am, which is my mental health struggles. Because most people won't understand that unless they've been there. Mm-hmm. Or they're a very good professional, because not all professionals understand fully. Then they won't. That's such a big part of who I am.
Yeah.
I need people who will also understand, so that when I'm struggling or having an irrational thought or having a bad day, I know there's people I can turn to and be open with, who won't judge me and won't say, that's just ridiculous. Why are you thinking that? Why are you doing that? Because that's not helpful. I do think it's good to have a mix of both.
I absolutely agree. And this is the side of social media and technology today that I absolutely adore, because it allows me to connect with people like yourself, to connect with people who not only understands you, but like deeply and profoundly know what you are going currently through, what you've been through, and what's going to happen in the future. So I think that's extremely important, and I think that's a great topic you touched upon. But hopefully this is not going to be our only conversation. I think we have a lot of things to talk about still. Before we conclude this part, can you tell us a bit more of your brand, the Fit Mom Formula, and how does your choice of a profession to help people change? How does this connect with your history?
Do you know, that's interesting, because when I first founded it, I didn't see any connection at all. I've always had an interest separate to my eating disorder. I've always had an interest in exercise and fitness and health. I said before, I was at stage school, I was a dancer. I had nutrition training through that. I went on and did beauty and holistic therapies after that. So I had some more nutrition and health qualifications. And I was approached by a fitness instructor with this idea of creating something that was accessible for mums who couldn't get out, because once you're a mother, it's hard to get childcare. There's not always you can't get to the gym, you can't get to the classes. They're always in the evening, just at the right time when you're trying to put the kids to bed or bath them. And it's really hard. A lot of programs that are designed to help people get fitter and lose weight aren't designed around family life. They're designed for individuals who are only shopping and living for one person. Whereas mums, we have children who come first. We have school runs to do. We have jobs to get to, some of us. We have chores to do. We don't have childcare. We don't do single meals. We make family meals. And at the time, there wasn't really anything that catered for that lifestyle. From a physiological point of view, it's the same. We just need to eat vaguely healthy food in the right amounts and exercise. So that's no different to anybody else. But trying to fit that into the context of motherhood is really difficult, because children in themselves are a full-time job. They're wonderful, but it's really hard. So we came up with this idea of having a service that was specifically for mums. So that's what I have, I have online programs, I've got books, I've got loads of free resources on my website, like blogs and videos. I'm on social media, so there's something for everybody, whether you like watching videos, whether you like reading, whether you actually want to engage in some coaching with me and some one-to-one work, or whether you just want to buy a book and have a read of that. There's something for everybody, but ultimately it's to help mums who are really struggling. They can see what they've got to do. They know what they've got to do. They've kind of read everything, but how do they fit that in around their life? Because that's the hard bit. It's when you haven't slept enough, when the kids are ill, they're off school, when you're really stressed, because kids are stressful. They're lovely, but they're really stressful. That's when people go, that's it. They don't have any more mental energy for themselves, and that's when it gets hard, and that's when they eat junk food and they turn to easy, less healthy meals, because they just don't have any energy left for themselves. So that's the bit that I help with, because I can relate to that as a mother of two young children myself. My girls are 9 and 5, so they're quite young, and it's really hard, and it takes a slightly different approach to fit all of that into motherhood. So that's what I do. I can completely empathize what it's like being a mum of young kids, how hard that is, and all the struggles that brings in. But also my qualifications and knowledge as a professional means that I know how to make the exercise and healthy eating bit as easy as possible, and how we can fit all of that into motherhood. And then from a psychological and emotional point of view, yes, my problems mean that I would undereat and restrict whenever I got stressed. But that's not that different actually from somebody who comfort eats when they're stressed. It's still using food as this emotional crutch. So if we can find other coping mechanisms for all of those struggles as well, then that's really important too. And that's why I'm really open with my mental health problems as well. I say, look, I've been there. I know what it's like to have stresses in your life, and I know how that can drive you to doing unhealthy things that aren't good for you physically. So we need to find a way around this. And I built up a great rapport with my mums, both members and paid clients, and also my followers and group members as well. You know, we've got a great connection going because we're so open and supportive with each other, and it's really important to have that sense of community.
Yeah, I love that, and obviously it's very rewarding. So to conclude everything, and I would like to leave this to you. Is there anything else you would like to add? Any final advice for, let's say, people who haven't yet decided to seek help? This can simply be a sort of a summary of everything we discussed so far, if you prefer.
I think the first thing everybody has to do is to be honest. And if you can't open up to people close to you, and it might even shock people when they think to themselves, I can't even tell my mum, I couldn't tell my best friend, I couldn't tell my sister or my partner or whoever. That's okay if you don't feel that you can be honest and open up to somebody who's perhaps a little bit too close to you. Come to me, come to you, Darko, like just be honest. Say, look, I'm struggling, and the very fact that you're opening up and saying, yeah, I've got this thing going on, is the first step. Because even if you don't know how to solve it in the moment, and it might be quite a long process, you first of all have to voice it and say, right, I'm going to face this head on, and the first thing to do is to tell somebody openly, whoever it is, tell anybody, tell somebody, I need some help, and I'm going to do something about this now. I don't know what this help's going to be just yet, but I know I've got to do something about this. So yeah, I would ask anybody listening to this to reach out to me, Darko, or anybody else, and just say it. Just say, I'm struggling right now. I've got some problems. I don't know what I'm going to do about them, but I'm being open, and I'm opening up and being honest. So that's really important. That's what I would ask everybody to do.
Fantastic. Polly, thank you. Thank you so much. This was amazing, and I honestly cannot wait to start editing this episode, just because you touched upon so many amazing things that resonate with me, and I think we provided a lot of value for others. So thank you very much once again, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with you again.
It's been brilliant. Thanks, Darko.